Stanford University.
So we're here with Jessica Livingston. She's one of the founding partners of Combinator. I'm sure most of you have heard of Combinator, but just sort of a few nuggets about you. Could you maybe just give a quick introduction of who you are, what you've done recently?
Yeah. Well, let me ask a quick question. Have any of you not heard of Combinator? Okay, so at least I just had to ask that just to see. So as I was saying earlier, we started it in 2005, really as an experiment. 2005 now seems like a lifetime ago to me. And it was a different place. Silicon Valley was a different place. The internet bubble, of the late 90s, you guys have probably at least heard about, even if you were still in like grammar school when that happened. But there were a lot of people starting startups and getting tons of VC funding, millions of dollars on nothing. They joked the buzzword was like vaporware, like no one had a product. And then the bubble burst, and it was like this disaster in like 99 to like 2002 was very bleak. And then it was late 2004, and I worked at an investment bank in Boston, and Paul was a writer in Cambridge, and we were dating. And I had gotten a book deal for Founders at Work, and I had decided the craziest thing I've ever done in my whole life, which was to quit my job with medical benefits and everything to work on this book, because I was really fascinated with startups and hadn't really been exposed to startups in my life. And through Paul and through his friends, I hear a lot of stories, and I was like, wow, there's cool stuff going on, and there's not much out there. There was not much about startups out there on the web or books. It wasn't transparent. So I sort of, through Founders at Work, sought to make things more transparent and to sort of demystify the process of starting a startup to encourage more people to do it. And Paul wanted to fund people and be an angel investor, but he didn't want to have a lot of the stuff that goes along with investing, like paperwork and having to meet with companies and evaluate them. So we sort of came up with this idea. I said, well, now that I'm doing this book, I'll have some extra time, and let's start an investment company together. And I'll do all of the operations stuff, and you help with the vision of the company and the technical stuff. So we said, great. We roped in Trevor Blackwell and Robert Morris, who were Paul's co-founders at ViaWeb, which was a company he did in the 90s. And we wrote a website, and we put up an application, because we said neither Paul or I, as I said, knew about investing. So put up the application, and here we go. Fast forward to the summer when we had 8 startups. And we learned a lot very quickly, and we moved out here, and every year we just sort of increased our network. I mean, at our first demo day, we had like 10 investors. It was pathetic. But it's changed a lot. So our brand has gotten out there, and honestly, a big part of it is the companies that we funded have now been doing pretty well. Reddit was a pretty big success, and of course Airbnb and Dropbox all started at Y Combinator. And what we do has definitely evolved, but it hasn't changed that much. So we fund companies really at any stage now. It could be just an idea. We also fund people who are simultaneously doing Series A rounds all over the map. And what we do, if they're not already incorporated, we help incorporate them with documents that we created that can be used as a template, so cleanly and in a standard way. Then we focus in on their idea and their startup, and each startup is at a different stage, so we sort of say, okay, what's your biggest thing that you're grappling with now? What's your biggest problem? And we help them figure out what that problem is. Some might be gosh, I don't know if my idea works. Some might say, we have an idea that we know there's something going on there, but we're just not getting any traction. Airbnb was like that. And then some have their idea and they just need us to help with growth. So it's all over the map, but we help advise them, and we help them with what their biggest problem is. And through
Have there ever been any problems you weren't able to solve for companies, or is there no such class of problems?
No, there are a lot of problems. The classes of problems that we're not able to solve are ones like co-founder disputes. We help them, but that will kill a company. And I'd say that's I know a lot about startup failure, And that's probably the second biggest problem. The first problem that we're not able to help solve, a lot of times we can, but sometimes, like with an idea, people just don't want the idea, And it's a lot of famous startups started off with something different and had to pivot. Because if you don't create something that a lot of people want to use, you're screwed. What we do, though, is we say, gosh, you're onto something. Why don't you try this? And set them in a slightly different direction. But that's probably the hardest challenge, is that sometimes we can't solve, like, if the co-founders aren't determined and I can't change your personality too much. I can help make you more formidable and more confident, giving you knowledge and giving you support. But I can't change your personality. And startups are really, really hard. And I've seen like Rhodes Scholars totally fail because they just can't stick with it when it's just this long slog. Sorry, I've rambled a little bit.
No worries. I'd
about the
imagine
background.
Also during sort of the entire YC experience, you've seen founders go through all types of emotional states.
Yeah.
And some people are at different states all the time. So
All
it
the
must be
time.
quite a bit of juggling on your part to
Well,
figure that out.
it is hard, and it's hard. It's funny because people tell me this all the time, and I know it's true. But when you're a founder, like one day things could be feeling great. You could be like, yes, we are about to like break through on this. And the next day you could be like, oh, we're totally going to fail. This is, why am I even working on this? And like nothing's really changed. It's a big emotional roller coaster. And things can change on a dime, especially when it comes to fundraising. You could have an investor say, okay, I'm gonna commit to $1 million. We just need to take care of the legal paperwork. And the person comes back and says, I'm getting funded for $1 million. And in the 2 weeks it takes the investor's lawyers to go through the legal paperwork, the investor might have gotten cold feet and will say, no, I talked to my board and there's a conflict here. We really can't invest. And so that's the kind of thing like that just can happen very suddenly, that just is very much a roller coaster. And you have to just be able to endure this emotional trauma as a founder. It's hard.
And of course, you've now dealt with it for 9 years.
Yes, so I need to warn you, I'm a little jaded. And if I say something that offends, please forgive me. Especially if it's about VCs, because I heard the classes through the VC lens.
No worries, that's probably why. The jadedness is probably why Steve Blank calls you one of the smartest people in the space.
Oh gosh, no. I've just been doing it for longer than other people for the accelerators. Because that's the thing, we were the first accelerator. Gosh, it didn't even have a name, accelerator. But now there are a lot of people doing similar things, just for a shorter amount of time.
Has it been difficult to differentiate Y Combinator from others, or sort of like a Techstars or something like that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how we differentiate ourselves, because we came up with the idea. I honestly believe that we more deeply understand what we're doing than anyone who's copied our model, and we're always thinking about it. And I think probably more accelerators are useful for the world. And what I think we need to do a better job at, I do think we're the best. I will say that, and I usually am pretty humble, so I am a little bit embarrassed to say that, but I do think we are. And what we need to do a better job of is sharing with people like you and the world, do a better job of what we do. Because we've always sort of been accused of, oh, you're so secretive. What goes on at YC? Why are you so secretive? And we're not. It was just we were always such a small organization. We were working with so many startups that we didn't have time to do blog posts and take pictures. And honestly, Kat, where are you, Kat? Over there. Kat's our director of outreach, and she's now really making efforts to feature some of the portfolio companies, and we're going to do a lot more events and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to sort of share more about what we do.
That's really exciting.
And one last comment, just in case any of you are interested in startups, I always say it's good to have competition, because competition validates your idea for external people. like investors, if you're like when we first started, investors were like, I don't get your model. I don't get it. Yeah, and then all of a sudden we had like 3 clones, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, like Y Combinator does it. They're doing those, and it just somehow, like, people and reporters too, they can't write a story about you if you're brand new doing something disruptive and new. You have to have other people so that they can say, you know, accelerators like Y Combinator and Techstars, and like they have to be able to name at least 3. So it's good to have competition, but just don't spend a lot of time worrying about them. We get a lot of founders like freaking out when a competitor, you know, gets a huge round of funding. What do we do? You know, what do? You execute better than your competition, and that's how you win.
Yeah, to your point about sort of the uniqueness of the Y Combinator experience, could you talk a little bit about that and what some of the highlights are through that? It's a very sort of rigorous, structured program.
Well, you know, it's not rigorously structured. In fact, just the opposite in terms of daily structure. I think some competitors have lots of meetings and stuff, and we try not to do that because in this 3 months, we want you to be the most productive you've ever been in your lives, which some people say like it was definitely the most productive thing. So you come to YC and you're working somewhere else. You're not working here. And we help you. We do a lot of office hours with our partners. And one thing that's different about us is that our partners are full-time partners. There's a lot of talk of like mentors. And what mentors are, I think, at other places are just sort of other people in the area who know something about startups who will come, you know, on a very part-time basis and sort of advise you. But we feel like we want all the partners to deeply understand what each startup's going through, and we don't want conflicting advice. So we're full-time, and we have great partners. We have the creator of Gmail is here, and Paul Buchheit and Jeff Ralston, who was actually the creator of Yahoo Mail, believe it or not. We just need to get like the Hotmail guy, and then we'll be triumvirate there. And just really smart people who know a lot about startups, full-time advising the companies. We do individual office hours, and we do group office hours, so a group of maybe 6 startups at once go around for 3 minutes hearing like, what is your big problem this week? And they'll say, well, I'm really struggling with this, and we'll give them quick advice, but we hope that other people sort of learn from that. So we do that. We, of course, have the guest speakers who come at dinner every week and sit here, and these guys, I mean, I've heard just about everyone except for maybe Larry Page and Sergey have not sat here.
Wow.
Like we've had every other, it's amazing, and I learned so much from them. Then we also have this great alumni network. Now that we've funded more than 600 startups, we have like almost 1,500 founders, and they're all very connected. Even if they don't know each other, they're on this list, and all the time there are questions like, oh my gosh, my server went down, what do we do? Well, the CloudKick guys will be like, we'll be there in 5 minutes to help you out. Like just everyone helps each other through, whether it's technical problems, someone has an answer, and there's a lot of like technically very sophisticated alumni. Like we have the author of, it's a famous programming language, Django. Like the author of Django is a YC founder. So you have like all these experts within the community, and if it's a technical thing, I need an introduction to this person at this bank. I need an introduction to this investor. How do I'm having trouble hiring. Like any question you want, someone will answer it. And they're all very helpful, and they're great. They also, the alumni, advise the new founders coming through, so we assign an alumni to the new startups, and that's sort of nice because you think, oh gosh, this is all very overwhelming. What do I need to expect from this kind of thing? So those are the alumni. We have some structure. We have something called Prototype Day where everyone comes and presents what they're doing. And it's sort of a nice, like we draw a line in the sand, like you have to have something to show. So it gives people sort of a fake milestone, as much as I hate to say that. Then we have demo days at the end. And by the way, in between all this, we're having little mini conferences on like fundraising. Here's what to expect for fundraising. We have other things like PR, we did one, how to get PR for your company, all these little subject things. So if you're interested, well, if you're not going to be the PR person for your company, you don't need to come to that. So like, don't waste your time unless you are going to be the fundraising person or the PR person kind of thing. But we have those. Then we have demo day. A week before demo day, we have a thing called rehearsal day, which is when everyone gets up and gives their 2.5-minute pitch. They all stink, and so we work really closely with them over the next week to make everything look great for demo day. And we have about 500 investors, angels and VCs, all the top people from around the country kind of come. And we always did that, and we think it's just so much more efficient. If you're trying to raise money, why go take all these meetings down Sand Hill Road that takes up, months and months and months when you can present to 500 people at once and then start the fundraising process that way. And then after demo day, like one of the biggest things that value we add that we don't really talk about too much is just help in fundraising and getting terms that are favorable for YC founders. Our advice is, look, if you get money from a good investor on decent terms, take it, close it, get back to work. Like, we're never advising the startups like, yeah, negotiate, 10 million's not enough for you, you need 13. We're not like that. But I will say, for the most part, just with sort of loose data we have, it kind of seems like Y Combinator founders, if they're good, if they have a good company, usually can command like a double valuation rather than people outside. So I feel like we add value there. Yeah. And so if people come and say, well, I don't want to give 6% of my company to you, I sort of think, well, we can help you out with the next round. Like, we'll make it up for you. But then, of course, they do YC, and they're like, oh, I don't, now I know, now I understand what you guys do.
And through that fundraising process, I'm guessing various companies need more hand-holding than others, and are you very sort of actively involved in that as well for those companies that need it more?
Well, there are natural fundraisers, and then there are unnatural ones. And unnatural people can learn to be good fundraisers. Natural fundraisers are people who are very good at negotiating, very charismatic. It's true. And of course, you have to start with a basis of a good product. Like, if you don't have a good product, no investor will fund you if you don't have growth. But if you have a nice growth curve, you have an idea that could be huge, and you're good at negotiating and good at presenting, you should have an okay time. But then there are people who maybe are shyer and aren't good at negotiating, who we help train, to be able to be concise and what should you play up in the pitch. But we really kind of tell people, you don't want to go outside of your comfort zone. You got to be you. You can't put on an act. You can certainly try to be more confident and know how investors are going to respond to different things that you say, but you always want to be you, because the investors are funding you for you, and you're going to be the CEO of this company,
More authenticity behind that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of students here would probably like to know about this question. What type of founders do you like to fund?
Oh, okay. Well, honestly, we fund so many different types of founders. So, like, there's never one type. If I had to say some themes, I love funding people. We love funding people who the founders are working on a big idea, potentially, that has their relationship is an organic relationship. Like, they were students together and they've worked together, or they were childhood friends, and they're possibly working on an idea that helps solve a problem that they've had. So it's very organic, rather than, oh, we met at a startup weekend and we had to come up with an idea and here it is. Like, I'm sure there are going to be examples of how that worked out, but usually I'm a little skeptical. So I love people who have known each other for a while, because there's a lot of trust that you need as co-founders, and there's so many hard times that you go through where that trust is going to be tested, that it's got to be there. I love people who are determined. Determination above all else is the most important quality in a founder. You could be the smartest person in the world and still fail at doing a startup, because they're so hard, and you have to be able to, like, pick yourself up and move forward even when you have no reason to do that. I love when people are domain experts. That's, whatever the domain is, like Adora Chung of HomeJoy, like just online cleaning services. Like she took a job as a cleaning woman with this cleaning agency so that she could understand like what these people needed and what they went through and could better serve them. Like I just love people who really are understanding. Like I get always nervous when like 2 40-year-old men come in and say, well, we're building this app for 15-year-old girls. And I think like, oh, do you really know 14-year-old, is this a problem that you have? So that's sort of the ideal scenarios.
Maybe their children, potentially.
Yeah, so exactly, it could be if it's their children, if they say, my daughter always is asking me for this, so we built this to solve her problem, I'd say, that's great, you're a domain expert,
Interesting. To get a little bit more into sort of the theme of the course as well, how do you think the funding landscape is changing? And obviously, your model has shaken things up a little bit. So could you talk a little bit about the changes?
Okay, this is a little bit indiscreet, but Paul loves to give this, I have to copy him and tell him this story, but like back 10 years ago, things were not as transparent as they were now. And what that meant, there were a couple things. First of all, there weren't as many angel investors. And a lot of times with a startup, you're just starting the idea, you're not really sure about it. You only need $500,000 to like hire a couple people, work for a year, and see if this idea goes anywhere. Or even $100,000 is really useful when you first start. And there's no way you're going to be able to go to a VC and get $5 million. And VCs only want to invest. They might say, oh, we do seed investments, but really that's not their thing. They want to invest lots of money and get like 25% of the company done. So there weren't that many options for a small amount of funding. And what Paul used to say, so now there are more angels, which is like dramatically helped things, because an angel can write a check on the same day for 50 grand and you're off to the races at least. Paul used to say, like back 10 years ago, like a VC could like drag a founder back into a dark alley, knife them, and leave them there, and like no one knows about this. No one hears that these investors maltreated startups. And I've heard so many horror stories of just horrible treatment on the part of VCs, like reneging on deals. When a YC startup in a previous batch had told me this story about how they had gotten funding for like $3 million, were working out of this VC's office. 3 of the founders moved their families from Texas to Silicon Valley, were working out of the office, but the paperwork had not been signed. And finally, they're about to have their first board meeting, and they're like, we need to sign that paperwork. And the guy's like, we're not funding you. And so that kind of thing doesn't happen as much because, at least amongst Y Combinator founders, we have a whole database and we keep track of how investors treat founders. And it gets shared. And so if you renege at the 11th hour, you're not getting anyone else from YC to come be funded by you. And like if you want to scare investors, you cut off their deal flow, and that they don't like that.
So you've also gotten into more transparency.
More transparency. And so more transparency means the founders are more empowered. That's the other thing. Founders used to, even 10 years ago, say, oh my gosh, this VC wants to fund us. We'll take your terms. We'll take your terms. Sure, this is our only shot. And now it's like they're more educated and they say, wait, I don't want to give up a board seat and give you 40% of my company and be forced to do all these things. They're more educated so they can negotiate a little bit better. And I think it's just more fair. At the end of the day, if you're the next Google and you invest on fair terms, as a venture capitalist, you're going to be great. You don't have to extract all these horrible terms to still financially do well for your LPs. So tons more transparency, tons more angel investors. A lot of people, especially people from like Google and Facebook and Twitter, who have themselves become rich from a startup, they're then going out and they're able to write, $100,000 checks to help the next, hopefully, Google. And that really helps the startup community and landscape.
Yeah. I've actually heard one VC once make a comment about sort of the incubation model, or the accelerator model, saying something like, because of that, a lot more people just go into startups and they flip them. Fewer big companies are getting started now. How would you sort of respond to a comment like that?
My response would be, I think, I disagree. Yes, there are more startups getting started. That's true. And startups are hard. A lot of them fail. So I don't think most people, at least not coming through YC, they don't set out to flip a startup. Like, you're not going to, you cannot succeed saying, we're just going to create this thing and get a lot of money for it. Like, it does not work that way. You have to be on a trajectory. But there are people that are doing well, and say after the first year, Google comes knocking and says, we'd like to offer you $15 million. And the founders think, oh gosh, I still own 80% of the equity. We've only been working on it for a year. $15 million bucks. I'll get after tax. Suddenly they're a millionaire. And the difference between zero money in your bank and $1 million bucks in your bank is a huge deal. And it's not like they're multimillionaires, but they have security. So there's nothing wrong with that. I don't blame anyone for wanting to do that. Someone like Mark Zuckerberg turned down those offers. And that's how you get to be a big company, by turning down those offers and keeping on your huge trajectory. And I think that's just the way it's always been. It's always hard to become a huge company. And I think the more small startups that get started, the more chance there is of the next big companies.
Exactly. Could you also talk a little bit about some of the sort of more recent things that you've been doing, like the Female Founders Conference, and how that sort of personally influenced you, and what kind of effect you want to sort of elicit with it?
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to see how many women are here today, because even 10 years ago, you probably might not be here, at least at through Y Combinator stores. Our applications, we don't ask for genders on applications, but you can sort of have an instinct about this. And we didn't have that many women apply. That's changing now. There are more women, I think, are interested in doing startups, and the number has been slowly coming up, and now in the last batch, we've funded more women in the startups than we ever have. It was 24%, Kat, of the startups in this batch had a female co-founder, which actually is high for us, and is great. And so we sort of said, gosh, why aren't more women applying? Maybe what I said to myself was, I want to do a conference just to inspire women, to see other women up here on stage telling their stories. So we initially said, we're going to get the YC alumni. Now there are several of whom are doing pretty well. Adora Chung is one of them of Homejoy, but there are a bunch of others. So we sort of put together this conference, and we were going to do it here. And when you take all these tables out and put chairs in, you can fit 200 people. We posted the applications. We got 1,200 applications. We're like, oh my God, the demand is so big. And these were impressive applications. Even though there were only a few questions, you could just tell. So we made a last-minute change at the Computer History Museum, where we could accept 400 people. It still wasn't enough. We had to reject a lot of people, but it was packed. I think there were actually 450 people there. And we had all Y Combinator alumni. We also had Diane Green of VMware, who is awesome, and I love her, and she's now doing a stealth startup in her 50s, which is so cool. And we had Julia Hartz, who's one of the founders of Eventbrite, come so that they could speak to sort of later stage stuff. We also had a panel on fundraising, which I strongly recommend all of you watch if you're interested in venture capitalists. I think there's a lot of useful information. People were pretty open on it. And it was fantastic. Kat, you were there. It was just magical. The energy there. Oh, and I got in a little bit of trouble there's controversy because I only let women in. We didn't let any men, not even the YC partners. And mostly it was like 99% because I said, if we're trying to inspire women, I need to save every seat for a woman. And we had so many applications that I just said, I'm only accepting women. But then the no YC male partners was more of a thing for me. It was sort of capricious. I was like, I just want an event in Silicon Valley that is only women because I think it will be fun. And it was. And everyone there was like, this is so cool. We have all of the presentations online, and I've had tons of like male alumni be like, those presentations were so freaking awesome. I loved them. So it wasn't like the content wasn't really just for women, but the conference was. Because I firmly believe that if we can just showcase more successful female founders, that's got to inspire other women to be able to say, I can do this too.
Agreed. Yeah, if you can see yourself in somebody else, it's much easier to relate and be inspired.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going on. We've been funding nonprofits. About a year ago, we funded a company called WOTC, and they provide sort of crowdfunded medical coverage. So someone, in Nepal can't afford to travel the 300 miles to get this life-saving emergency procedure that they need that only costs $800, but that's impossible for them. You can go on, donate $20, and it reaches a goal, and it's like already saved tons and tons of people's lives, and it is so awesome. And we met them and we said, come do YC, because even though you're a nonprofit, we feel like we can add value, and we feel like there's a lot of concepts to make startups successful that we can apply to a nonprofit. And it was really cool. It worked. And they got lots of donations from the demo day attendees. So we then launched a nonprofit application. We funded, I think, 7 in this batch. And they're doing okay. We'll see. Time will tell. But that was really cool. We've been doing that. That's sort of new for us. Not sure what else we're doing. Startup School, again, is happening this fall. Well, that's sort of a big project we'll start working on. I don't know.
Anything else that's new or that's in the works that you want to talk to us about?
Well, Sam Altman taking over. Stanford, not alum, but he went to Stanford and dropped out back in 2005.
Close enough.
And, I feel a little guilty because we were responsible for that, and I hate being responsible for anyone dropping out of school. But I feel like Sam, he was going to do it anyway. I don't know. That's just the way he is. He's sort of a wise soul. And he was, So he was in our first batch, and he's been a partner. He was a part-time partner for many years while he was doing Looped. And then Looped got acquired, and then he became a full-time partner, and now he's taking over as president. Paul Graham will still be involved, but not doing any of like meetings and dealing with problems and stuff like that. He's going to be working with the founders in the new batch on their idea of doing office hours. So Sam's taking over everything else, which is wonderful. It's a big change, but a really exciting change. And we'll have a few other press announcements soon, some new partners and stuff. So.
Excellent. I also heard from Kat you're moving into a new building.
Yes, it's right across the street. It's the one under construction. We bought it because we love this street. It's sort of hidden away back here and quiet. And we bought that building, and we're renovating it now to be this really cool space that has an actual like legal kind of kitchen and stuff like that, and more bathrooms. So we only have 2 bathrooms here, and like at events with hundreds of people, you can imagine. So we're really excited, and I think, is that going to be ready for the summer batch? Yeah, it's going to be ready for the summer. So we're really excited about that. Just things are great, and we're seeing a lot more people starting startups, and with a lot more ideas that are even just outside like technical ideas, and a lot more international people. We had the most countries represented in this batch than we've ever had. So all good. It's all good.
It's exciting. Yeah, it really seems like starting a company is being sort of another career trajectory that's mainstream.
Yes.
So it's like management consulting, iBanking.
That's very important, because even 10 years ago, there were like 2 options: go to grad school or like get a job at a bank or like McKinsey or Google or something. And I feel like now people are like thinking, oh, I could do a startup too. And parents, I don't know whether it's a Social Network movie or what, but like parents are like, oh, you're gonna do a startup. Okay, I get it. That's cool.
It's just like the movie.
Yeah, it sounds pathetic, but I think there is a hint of truth in that.
Excellent. I mean, that's all the questions that I had. I'd love to sort of open it up to everybody else and ask questions.
Good question?
Going back to the funding point, I'm curious to get your perspective. To get your perspective on how you think something like Y Combinator would have fared back in 1999 through 2002, and given recent discussions about valuations being very high, I'm just curious, because you're so dependent on follow-on rounds of funding and obviously eventual public market access. I mean, how would Y Combinator have a sustainable model in a more down market?
Well, don't forget 2008 and 2009. In 2008, there was speculation of like the Great Depression. And we were, quite honestly, a little freaked out. And in fact, I remember this specifically because Airbnb we funded in the winter of '09. And we told people we chose the people we were funding in November of '08. And this is, again, there was a crash and like everyone was thinking like, this is really bad. Valuations like sunk. And we thought, gosh, we got to be really strict. We're only going to do a small batch. We can only fund people who will be able to get to profitability on their own, like not be dependent on funding. They can make, even if it's like ramen profitable, they can get there. And so we were very strict about that. We only funded like 16 groups, I think. And we told people, if you want to defer, because we have no idea what's going to be happening in the fundraising world in March, when demo day would be for that winter batch. We said we have no clue. We're kind of frightened ourselves. If you want to defer to the next summer, that's cool with us. So Airbnb was in that batch, and I think it's public knowledge that like their first valuation was like $3 million for their seed round, and that was kind of low. But it wasn't awful, and they're doing fine. So that was a long answer to your question. Like, even if the fundraising climate does get worse, I still feel like if you can still get some money, you can ride it out and be okay. Like, it doesn't worry me too much. I don't think it's going to go away. Like, I really don't think that this will be a place where like you can't find any money as a really promising company. Maybe companies that aren't that good, that might have gotten a little bit of funding when it was frothy, they might not be able to get funding. But if you have a good idea and you've executed well so far, maybe the valuation's going to be a little bit lower, but I'm not, like, that doesn't scare me too much.
Sorry, can you tell me a little bit about how you raised your first fund when initially you guys started out, given that you had a model that no one had done before or tried before, and so I'm sure that was hard. And can you tell me a little bit about why you think that first batch was so successful? I mean, that's pretty incredible. That I think you said out of like 8 people you funded that year, like 4 of them are pretty big, right? So.
Yeah. Well, let me answer the first one first because it's a little complicated. The lucky thing for us is that we were self-funded when we started. If we had gone to people in 2005 and asked for money, I guarantee you no one would have given us a dime. They would have thought we were crazy. So we put in our own money. We didn't need that much. We were only giving $12,000 to like 8 startups. So like it's not like we needed millions of dollars. So self-funded for a couple years, and there was like, I think Reddit exited a year and a half into it, so we got a little bit money. We were always able to like sort of scrape by a little bit. And then in 2008, I think it was, we really ramped up the number of companies that we were funding, and we said like, we're spending some serious money here, so we got to look externally to get funding. And to be honest, like I probably shouldn't give you advice on how we raised, because we did the exact opposite of what I'd tell anyone else to do, which is we went to our friends at Sequoia because we had known them well, and Greg McAdoo would come and speak here all the time, and we said, we didn't really like to fundraise ourselves, like, and we said, we were looking to raise money. Sequoia said, okay, we're interested, and that was it. Anyone else, I'd tell you, never want to talk to just one investor. You always want to have a competitive situation. You really do. But it worked out okay for us. We got funding pretty easily because at that point it was 2008, and Sequoia had funded like 5 of our startups, and they saw the value in what we're doing, and they saw us as like a great source of deal flow, and they liked working with us, so that worked out well. Then the second question was, how do we get the great batch? You know, possibly part of it's luck, a little bit, but also remember these were people who were reading Paul's essays, and I have to believe they're pretty sort of adventurous people. If they were gonna like not take a job after graduation, you know, at McKinsey, and they were gonna go with some like crazy new idea called Y Combinator, and I kind of feel like that helped. And yeah, we had, you know, the Justin TV guys, Sam of Looped, Reddit, there were some other ones, and it just sort of worked. I don't know.
Many Silicon Valley thinkers have kind of commented on the kind of preference between co-founder models and single-founder models. I'm curious what you think is more effective in your experience in Y Combinator, what you've seen with companies that have come in with 2 founders or one.
So what's the difference between two founders or more?
Right,
and
right.
one?
I mean, like just generally, I mean, whether you think it's more effective to like go with a co-founder model as opposed to say single person.
Yeah, sorry, you confused me by calling it the co-founder model. But I think I'm an expert on single founders versus co-founders. And co-founders are better. Assuming you get along and you have this trust that I talked about, it is so much better to have 2 people or more. Probably not more than 3, to be honest. Like 2 to 3 is the magic number. The reason is, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, there's so much to do when you're just getting started. Like, it's impossible. It's so hard for one person to do everything that you need to get done. And more importantly, having 2 people, you have someone to talk to, and you have someone to like say, I'm thinking of doing this, what do you think? You can bounce ideas off of that person. Because remember, if you're just a single founder, you're sitting at your desk being like, okay, what do I do next? And it's very demoralizing. People are rejecting you all over the place. You could say, I'm not sure what, you're just operating by yourself, and that's very lonely and very demoralizing. And I've seen it happen a lot. We do fund single founders. So I don't want people to think that we don't, because we do. And in some, there have been a few cases where they have been effective and have been able to do a lot and get things done, and then they hire a team. But they always come and they say, I'm looking for a co-founder. And I think, oh, it's going to be really hard to find one. Like, if you're already started, it's sort of hard to bring someone else on as a co-founder. But definitely 2 or more is better. And again, just remember the roller coaster, the emotional roller coaster that doesn't make any sense because nothing's changed. So if like one person's down, the other person can say, don't be down, don't worry, we're just gonna do this and it'll work. You think, okay, I'll do this, I'll try it out. But if there's no one spurring you on, it's easy to sort of stay down. So yeah, if you can, like I'd recommend anyone to try to find a co-founder before they started a company.
So I'm a space nut, and I'm just wondering, have you been following some of the companies that have started some of like Skybox and Cosmosia, which is now Planet Labs, and have you seen more applications or applicants starting to focus there?
That is a good question. I have to admit, I have not been personally following it, so I don't know what the answer. Kat, do you know anything? Are we getting more applications in space stuff?
I haven't seen, but I also, I haven't seen, in this batch, I haven't seen too many that are space
Yeah, sorry, bad lame answer.
That's okay. Just curious.
I also, one of the problems with me, I have 2 kids, and so when I'm not doing YC, I'm with them, and I sometimes like don't pay attention to things going on that aren't directly related to what I'm doing, so I apologize that there isn't another partner here.
So a question regarding the program. You said that you want the founders and the people working to be like the most productive through these 3 months, and you also talk about the value of building that community through the mailing list or like the weekly dinners and stuff like that. So I was wondering what the thinking is behind not having them house or work out of an office space together as well.
That has always been sort of a deliberate thing on our part. When we first got started and there were only 20 people, we probably could have fit them in our office working, but we said no. And the reason we don't want them all working in one space is that we really feel like company cultures get started early on. When it's just the founders and it's maybe in their apartment or whatever, and we don't feel like those company cultures can flourish if they're in the confines of our building. In addition, it's possible to get interrupted, to start chatting with people, and we just feel like we've always said, we want to fund the companies and help them and bring them together, but not have them work here, and that's kind of why.
I wanted to know a little bit more about, I'm not sure, but I think YC is located only here. You don't have other branches in different places, right? So do you have any plans maybe expanding internationally? Because I know there's like a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on like India and Israel and different places. So is that a market that you're hoping to like tap into at all, or?
Well, we are hoping to tap into it, but we hope to tap into it in the way we already are tapping into it, which is move to Silicon Valley for 3 months, do YC, and then move back. And you're laughing, but I'm serious. I know that there are a lot of international startup hubs that are flourishing, and a lot of great things are going on there. I think a lot of people, if they can apply to YC, come here for 3 months, do our thing, be exposed to Silicon Valley, and then move back. I think that's like a win-win,
But do you think that just given that their native environment is so different from Silicon Valley's environment, that the expertise that they get here might not be the best for like maybe flourishing?
I don't think that, because I think what we're talking about, at least for what we're funding, is usually stuff on the web, and like it's all about your product and getting users. And I don't really think, like, maybe there's some cultural differences and stuff, but I don't think, like, we've funded a lot of people from other countries, and we've seen them get value from our advice and from being here. So for now, that's our plan. I don't like the idea of opening up different offices, because I think I worry about keeping the quality. You sort of lose control of the quality of what goes on. So, visas are a big problem for people. Usually international people can manage to come here for the 3 months, but then often when they have to go home, even if they don't want to sort out the visa stuff, and it's very expensive, it's very time consuming. So in that respect, that's a bad thing. Like, I wish we could help them where they are. But for now, I do think it's beneficial for people to come here for the 3 months.
Hi, I'm from China, and this YC model has been widely copied in China. There are many new incubators, and none of them are as successful and as influential as YC. And I wondered, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. Why they're not why there doesn't exist a YC for China?
I worry about talking a little. I don't, by saying that, I don't want to put anyone down. It all depends on the people that you have, the knowledge you bring to the table. If you're copying someone's idea, you might not have sort of the intimate understanding of why you're doing things. Like, I always sort of joke, people would copy our application verbatim, and just because it was up there, and they'd literally like post a copy of the same questions, and we'd go on their website, and I'd be like, that's Paul's writing, and they would have copied our text. And like when you're copying someone, you might not understand like, why are they making it 3 months? They're making it 3 months because that's what we do. Well, we had a reason for that, and like, I don't know. I sort of speculate if they're just copying something, they don't deeply understand why they're making the choices that they are. And like the proof is just, can you accelerate a company? And that often takes at least 3 years. So maybe there will be in 3 years like successful ones, but it takes a little time to get that kind of traction. You can't just like open up shop and say, oh, we're now as successful as Y Combinator. It takes a few years.
You touched on this a little bit when you spoke about how YC funded a nonprofit last year, I believe.
Yeah.
But do you see that as a growing trend where YC is actually going to be funding more social enterprises, maybe with less of a focus on the for-profit business model?
Well, like everything we do, it's an experiment, and so I hope we fund more stuff like that, and like the nonprofits we're just starting to see if we can help them, and if we can help them get donations, if we can help improve their product and stuff. So we'll see. My hope is that we do, but we're still sort of seeing how this works, because we want to, you could just like donate to those things, but we want to be able to help doing what we do best, and so we're sort of seeing if our experiment works. So.
Hi, so I have 2 questions. The first one is about the YC Female Founders Conference. I was wondering if that's something that you plan on continuing in the next year, and kind of like, what is your vision from like doing this after, one time, and what you see in the future? And my second question is like, you talked a lot about, failure, like, in the beginning, and things that you guys have learned kind of like as a startup as well. So like, what are some key trends or key things that you guys have picked up from those failures as you've like continued on funding cycles?
Well, let me first tell you, yes, we will be doing another Female Founders Conference. Not sure what the timing will be, but probably early next winter. Like it'll be like an annual thing. And we're gonna plan further in advance and get a big auditorium so that I can accept hopefully everyone who applies, because I hate turning people away. So yes, and the vision, I'll probably stick to what the current version was, which was the goal being to inspire more women to start startups by seeing like successful startups on stage who are founded by women. So I might change, I don't know, but that's the plan for right now. And so the second question, let me make sure I have this right, is like, what have we learned from failure? Several things. Okay, determination, the significance of determination, I touched on that again, but you will fail if you cannot stick with it through the hard times, and there are gonna be so many hard times, whether it's fundraising or finding users or growing or whatever. Determination is the most important quality. Focus. I see a lot of people fail because they're all over the place, and we got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to build these 20 features, and I'm going to these 20 events, and I'm meeting all these people for coffee and getting all this work done. Because remember, meeting for coffee feels like work. But it's not work, because for startups, there's usually like one big problem that you're dealing with right now. So if you're doing all these other things and not focused on solving that one problem, that's not good. So focus is like so critical in doing a startup. Empathy for users is like a big thing I see in failure. Startups apply to us and they say, here's our idea, and we love this idea. And they go and like work on the idea. They don't talk to users. They don't launch a product to get feedback on that idea. That, oh, we're still polishing, or it's not working exactly the way we want it to. It doesn't have all the features. And they are just oblivious to if people will use this. And then they launch it, and lo and behold, like no one's really excited. They might get like a little spike in traffic from like a TechCrunch article, but then like the product is not good enough for people to come back. So they don't, and boom, they're down here. And like getting out of down there is hard. So if you haven't been listening to what your users want, it's a problem. Let's see, those are probably like the biggest. I mean, again, failure also comes in the form of like stepping on a landmine that you've created yourself by like co-founder disputes. I've seen tons of like great ideas that are like dead because the founders don't get along and it just dies. So choosing a co-founder is a really sort of important first step. Those are probably the biggest themes from failure.
On the quick question for me, on the co-founder front, have you seen any sort of patterns that have worked really well between sort of personality types? Or are there no clear patterns there?
There aren't to me. There's so many that work as long as like the founders get along. I mean, it often helps if the founders are in charge of different things. That's usually useful, but I wouldn't say like, oh, you have to be in charge of different things. Like, it's all over the map. I don't really have a recipe for success, except usually there's some history. I mean, it's embarrassing for me to say this. Like, usually there's a history because it's kind of famous that Drew Houston, brought on Arash as a co-founder after he applied to YC, and we said, you need to get a co-founder. But there was sort of that mutual background. They both went to MIT, and they had common friends, even though they weren't, longtime friends. So it can work. Anything can work in this crazy business. Like, everything I say, take with a grain of salt, because there's always exceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm curious, what is your involvement in companies after they've left the 3-month period here?
Yeah, we're still involved. They don't come to dinners every couple months, but they still do office hours with us. I mean, a lot of times the evolution is that they'll get funded by other investors, and those other investors will help them. But we still keep in touch with them. We have reunions all the time. Like, we still meet with the Airbnb guys, say, what can we do to help? So we still continue to be close with them. We're just not like emailing them on a daily basis. But they can always find us.
So I also have actually 2 questions. So the first question kind of related to what you were talking about with the nonprofits. I was just curious, I'm guessing you can't take an equity stake in them since they're nonprofits. So
right.
Then how do you keep that sustainable in the long run? Is it just purely a donation? So that's a quick question. But my real question was, or my second question was, I'm curious, as you guys are growing and your alumni network gets bigger, how do you keep the existing alumni engaged and sort of still integrated in the community? Because I'm sure that over time that's going to grow really big, and at some point that network gets diluted, right? So I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Well, to answer your first question, they are donations, and that's what they'll always be. There's no financial incentive for us. We just sort of want to help the world through helping these startups. Then the dilution of the alumni network, we're up to like 1,500 people. It hasn't been that diluted. They're all like really good people, and they're all smart in their own way. Even if they've failed miserably, they have something that they can add, some sort of knowledge that they can add. They're very engaged. You'd be like amazed at how engaged these people are, and they're all up in San Francisco. Like, so few. That's another thing that's changed in the past 10 years. Like, so few of our startups stay down here, which makes me sad. But they're all up in San Francisco. They're like friends with each other. They're mixing around, and like they sort of sustain this network. We don't do tons and tons of stuff other than a few reunions and stuff like that. But it's sort of self-sustaining. That's sort of the best answer.
So as you grow, do you think the brand is getting, is it like, I'm just wondering, because you're funding more and more companies, right? So how do you keep up that brand? Because like that means there's just going to be more and more companies that fail or might not meet the standards. And are you afraid of that or worried about that?
No. I mean, I hate when companies fail, but they always have, and they always will. But if we can get some ones that succeed, I think that keeps the brand up. I mean, doing startups, you have to know going into it, chances are high you're going to fail. And YC is not a silver bullet. You're not like, oh, I'm in YC, I'm going to be a success now. That is like so not the case. You're the reason for your success. We only support you and advise you and help you along. So I think if there continue to be, it would be bad for our brand if we had no successes as we grew. That would be really bad. So I would worry about that. But if there were some, I'd say it's always sort of been like that.
Given the small amount of cash you put into, or relatively small amount of cash you put into startups, I would imagine it's hard to get a capitally intensive business incubated here. But when Sam was in one of our classes last quarter, he talked about how this is like the first, you guys are like doing a nuclear power startup with this class, and maybe more interested in getting into, is that not true?
Yeah. Is that I don't.
There's not nuclear, but there was like G batteries.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, okay. All right, yeah, we didn't fund a nuclear.
Okay.
So that's why I was like, huh? Well, but, okay, yes, we are funding more companies that traditionally have needed more like capital infusion early on. And usually what we do, well, first of all, yeah, what we do is they get $100,000 when they come through YC. And then we'll just help try to introduce them to investors on a case-by-case basis early to get more capital. But we always are like, what's the least amount of money you can take to get this thing off the ground? That's always our advice. You know, it's not like go out and raise $5 million because you got to do all of this manufacturing. It's like take the Meraki route, which is like manufacture as you go along and use like the last order to pay for the new ones. Like we always try to encourage them to live cheaply, but we'll help introduce them to investors. Yeah, just at 5. Okay, yeah.
So I had a twofold question too. So could you first talk about like a few trends that you've seen, like what kind of startups have really succeeded through like the past 2 years, for example, like which areas have they really succeeded in, and then in the next round, like if there was a idea that you really wish comes in, like what would that be?
Oh gosh. Okay, I'll start with the non.
So that I can
the non-stumper. The non-stumper question, which is, why do the companies succeed?
No, so just like what different, like what areas
were
the companies in?
I'm going to tell you, it's not areas. It's execution of the founders. Like honestly, like if you look at our most successful portfolio companies, you got like Airbnb renting out rooms and space, and then you have like deeply technical things like Dropbox, you know, storage and file synchronization, and Stripe payments. And they have to, by the way, they early on were like 20 years old and had to negotiate with banks and stuff, which is crazy. It's all about the execution of the founders that makes or breaks companies. We've funded so many big ideas that I feel like could have been the next Google and weren't because the founders couldn't execute well on that. So that's my answer. There's no specific space. And like there's no idea that I wish someone would you know, I sort of get excited because I try not to get married to ideas because half the time they fail and I get really bummed out, and it's often ones that I start using and I'm like, I love this, and then they fail. I don't know, I get excited about like people who have like started the idea because they're solving their own problem. It could be really huge. They have something to show that works. That's what excites me. It's not a particular idea or a particular space within technology.
Last question.
So you talked about you have 2 kids now. How do you balance life? I mean, you have 1,500 children. 1,502, I guess now. So how do you balance life?
That's like the hardest. How to what? Oh, you did? That's like the hardest thing of all, and it's really funny that you asked me that. I hope I don't burst into tears. But like just today, we had a temporary babysitter because my regular babysitter's on vacation for 2 weeks, and she wasn't working out, and so I said, don't come today. And so all of a sudden, like my day, I'm balancing all these like dishes spinning on every like thing that I have, and if one thing breaks, like everything comes tumbling down. So I had to like cancel every meeting that I had today, and I was like, oh God, this class, like I cannot cancel on this. So I had to like rope in a colleague of mine to go to my house and babysit. Well, it's here, you know, and I'm thinking, gosh, you know, when I get in trouble for saying like it's harder to do a startup with kids, people think that like, no, it's not. Anyone can do it. I think like that's a load of shit, okay? Because it is harder. It's not impossible. It can be done. It is being done all the time, and you can be super successful with kids. It's just a little bit harder because your brain is taken up by the kids. You want to spend time with them. You have to manage their lives. You have to like physically be around if they get sick or your nanny can't come or whatever. But you just do. I mean, I love Y Combinator, and I like love working with the startups and talking about startups. So you figure out how to manage it, and you do. You just don't have all of the time and the brain cycles available that you had like before. Like when we first started Y Combinator, I worked 7 days a week, pretty much all day long on Y Combinator, and I'd like could catch up on things on the weekend. And now I can't catch up on anything on the weekend because I'm with my kids. So you just make it work. I worry we're ending on a bad note. Like,
What you really need is a last-minute babysitting app or service.
you know, I interviewed someone with a last-minute babysitting service, and I worried about funding them because the idea, we'll see if it works, but you had to like, in order to get access to babysitters, you had to give up names of your babysitters, and I was like, I know this sounds really cutthroat, but I'm not giving up the name of my babysitter because like I could not survive. That's another answer. Like I could not survive without our babysitter. She's like their grandmother. She's like amazing. She's part of our family. Yeah. So yeah, a new babysitting app might be one that I'd be super excited, which is how do you get a babysitter who's trustworthy, reliable, super awesome, with a moment's notice.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for all coming. I hope this was useful. Hope you had your questions answered.
This was a lot of fun.
But yeah, email us. You can email Kat, K-A-T, at ycombinator.com, or me if you want to email X, as in X-ray, X at ycombinator.com. Because I was the only woman. I was the only female when we started, so I chose X. Yeah, so thanks for coming and enjoy the class.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.